Welcome to Comms in a Nutshell, your go-to place to listen to discussions with industry experts and global brands about the world of work, internal comms, technology, and how you can get the best out of your workforce. At the end of each episode, we wrap up all the tips and findings in a nutshell so that you can start implementing them right away. We hope that you all had a wonderful Christmas and a happy new year. And to kick things off in 2022, myself and Scott are chatting to Daniel Cave in this episode. Daniel is a well-established HR journalist. He has just recently left his role as the head of content for HR Grapevine, an award-winning HR publication, to be an independent HR journalist. Daniel is continuously immersed in and writing features and news on HR, people management, workplace trends, employee well-being, and current affairs within the workplace today. Daniel was voted HR Journalist of the Year in 2020 at the Willis Tower Watson Virtual Media Awards, and we're really looking forward to discussing HR trends and challenges for the year ahead and how you can prepare and adapt to them. Enjoy this episode.
Welcome to Comms in a Nutshell. I'm your co-host Scott, and I'm joined today by Vic, our host.
Hi everyone.
And we're joined with Daniel, who was up until recently the head of content for HR Grapevine, but is now an independent freelance journalist for human resources and internal communications. This episode, we're going to be looking at the challenges for 2022 that will be affecting the realm of HR. So really, Daniel, how are you to begin with?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Looking forward to discussing, the ever-changing HR agenda, and kind of hoping maybe to make some connections for those in HR about what, conversations that I've had with HR practitioners that can shed some light on where the function will go in the future.
Amazing. Thank you, Daniel. So yeah, obviously, as you said, we want to educate our listeners of the potential challenges that those in HR and comms are kind of going to be faced with this year. So can you tell the listeners what you think, in your opinion, are going to be the top challenges that are going to be coming in 2022?
Yeah, sure. I guess up front, I want to state that this is my get out of jail free card in case I'm like massively, off kilter with some of my suggestions, but I'm not a HR practitioner. But what I feel really, really lucky about is that through my role as, ex-head of content at HR Grapevine and now as a freelance journalist, that I get a lot of face time with a lot of really senior HR people and some really forward-thinking and people that are way more intelligent than myself that operate in the HR and the business space. And as a result, I get to like create this patchwork of where I think the function might go. So I've made, as you asked Victoria before I came on this podcast, some predictions, but I think before I get into those, I want to say that I think actually it was a really, really difficult task that you set me, because I think HR's less and less siloed, and it's less about you've got to focus this year on your comp and bends, or you've got to focus this year on your comms, or focus this year on your IT and your technology provision. It's so difficult to pick those apart now, I found, because they're all affecting each other, and HR is a bit more holistic in how it thinks. So I feel that whilst I've made a few predictions, actually there's like an underlayer of all of them that might be, well, actually this speaks to the employee experience as well. Well, actually this speaks about what people want from work these days. So It was a really, really difficult task is what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way. However, my first prediction for what HR should be focusing on this year is communication. Now, I know that sounds really, really obvious. And in fact, a recent study from Sage People that thinks that, so Sage People data found that HR as a function itself thinks that one of the best ways to get like a really good business outcome this year will be focusing on making your communication better. So I guess end of there, I don't have to put my neck on the line. It's just that HR itself has said that. However, I think underneath that, why they think communication is so important is one, HR is having to be a bit more strategic, and there's so much change at the moment. There's a really good study from PwC every year, which looks at what CEOs are thinking and what they're worried about. And what they're saying, so this is a 2021 study looking forward, is that uncertainty and like big shifts and the shifts to the employment landscape and policy and the business landscape and technology are going to happen. So of course, the follow-on from that is, if so much change is happening and there's so much uncertainty, the very least you can do is communicate well. So like communication during a time of change, the pandemic was a really good example of this for HR, is really, really crucial, because even if you don't know the answers or you have a really, really long-term view of something, you can just keep your people in the loop. So organizations that did this well were often the organizations that were able to like survive/thrive during the pandemic. And that's going to be really, really useful going forward as well, because we all know that big changes on the horizon. The second reason I think that HR people are saying that comms is going to be super, super important is that there is so much demand on employers now from employees, and there's so much tweaks to not just the strategic and the uncertainty and the macro outlook, but also like the day-to-day and the operational. So it's just good to know in a two-way way as well. It's not just HR telling the business what's happening and employees, but like learning what their employees want. So those surveys and things like that. So it's about understanding literally the minutiae of where your business is at each day and able to take a temperature check and maybe, you know, get some data from that and create a better view going forward. I think as well, the reason that HR is probably focused so much on comms, as that Sage study showed, is because what we saw at the start of the pandemic is that HR started to own communication a lot more than other functions. I spoke to some really senior HR people at the start of the pandemic, and they said, well, basically we've become like an ad hoc, you know, like call center for like, what does this change mean? Or what does remote work mean? Or how can I get a laptop, etc. Or what does this mean for my health and safety? Or I've got a vulnerability, what does this mean? And they've really not let that go. I at least in the conversations that I've been having. So whilst it might not want to have taken that role at the start of the pandemic, or might not have had it, you know, traditionally, it was super well placed because it has this like really unique view, I feel, at least in the conversations that I've had of the business, where it interacts with so many different departments and is kind of like in the loop when it comes to finance or legislation or people or just like the business structure, that it's got a really, or has the ability to be able to like get all that information in, distill it in a way that it's people will understand because it is the people function, and then put that out in a way that it knows is more likely to be accepted, digested, and then responded in a really good manner to by its people as well. I think that's just going to be really increasingly important as well, because we know it's not just like big external changes that HR has to deal with, but lots of smaller things too. So, you know, what workers want day to day, how they perceive changes their organization are doing, maybe hopes and dreams and fears about their career, etc., etc. So I mentioned two-way communications at the start of my answer here. And I think that's going to be a really big part of it too. It's not just a HR communicating what's happening to its staff, but literally the staff themselves coming back to HR and being like, actually, this is where I feel, or this is where I feel the organization should go, or this is what I'm worried about, and distilling that in a, you know, like either via an employee survey or a big data set. And then it can basically create a good strategy or include that in any strategic conversations it's having as well. This should be really, really simple. I feel like there's lots of studies out there that shows better communication drives better performances basically as well. Like IBM do some research on this. There's a super smart guy in HR called David Green who literally puts out a weekly newsletter about this that basically goes, look, get better at surveying your staff and understanding what they want, get better at communicating to them. And guess what? You'll probably have better results as an organization anyway. And from what I've just said, that seemed to sit with HR. I think the last thing that I wanted to say about comms is that essentially it's increasingly, with so much change going on, HR is going to have to either tweak the way the organization works or roll out new programs or roll out new ways of working to respond to environmental changes. And that will only be successful if your staff buy into it. So there's something called I guess it's the marketing mindset. You have to figure out a campaign around everything you're doing. You can't just go, well, we're going back to work from home, or we're rolling out this new platform, because people just don't buy into that at all. It's about understanding the way that will resonate the most with your staff and then creating some kind of like communication strategy around that. BT did this at the start of last year. they had to roll out a new way of communicating for all of their staff. And they were, internally, they were really, really nervous about this, but they came up with this really HR and comms teams in tandem, well thought out campaign. And as a result, they're able to change everything super, super quickly. And that was because they focused on making the information around it consistent, reliable, explaining why it would work to their employees, and then linking it back to like the day-to-day practices that would benefit employees as well. So it's, I guess, all of this change is wrapped up in businesses are going to have to change. So therefore HR has to focus on like really, really getting its comms right as a result.
Yeah, I like that idea of having like a marketing mindset and kind of like having a story about why you're going to do things. Definitely. So I just want to go back. So you said about like the two-way communication, like what actionable thing do you think we can say to people to say, this is how you can do that in 2022? So like your engagement surveys and your pulse surveys, would you recommend them as like the top two things?
Yes, yeah, I would. And that's not me recommending them. There's some very successful HR leaders who helm companies that are global now, and they say it is about that constant communication with staff. It's not just a temperature check one time a year. It is a pulse survey, but it can't be superficial. It has to like go a little deeper. Now, obviously, that will look different depending on what the culture and the structure of your firm is, but understand how the mechanisms within your firm is what they're saying, and then like dive deep into that. Or if you've recently rolled out a change, ask people how they respond to that. Have some close so you can like have some quantifiables, but also have some opens as well so you get a bit more anecdotal as well. So yeah, I'd 100% agree, Victoria.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So I guess following on from the marketing mindset that I just talked about for comms is, for this year, HR is probably going to have to think a little more deeply about how it positions itself as an employer of choice on the talent landscape. There's a few simple whys around this, I feel. So it's a time of massive change, obviously, over the last 2 years. And I think that's resulted in individuals wanting a little bit more from the brand or the company that they work for. So it's no longer just about this simple exchanges, I give you my time and you give me some money as a wage. It's do you look after me? Do you have a positive impact in the world? Are you a sustainable employer? Are you a socially conscious employer? These are some of the big questions that we're hearing get louder and louder, especially over the past 2 years. And I don't think they're going to go away anytime soon, especially as the employer-employee dynamics change. And, talent that is sellable, or individuals with a lot of skills that are desirable right now, they have a lot of power, so they can drive some of this. We've seen as well, and another reason that HR needs to focus on employer brand, talent attraction is getting a lot more difficult. We all know it's a difficult jobs market at the moment. Some of the economy wonks and people look at the data of this suggest that actually that's not going to go away anytime soon. This is like for the long haul, so businesses are going to have to think a bit more about how they're positioning themselves to job seekers. In fact, there's some research out there that says that actually the overwhelming majority of job seekers are only likely to apply to a job if an employer is like actively managing its brand. So it's a really significant factor. On the flip side of that is, if you've miscalculated how your brand sits, you can deter the candidates you want from applying to. I think increasingly as well, like consumer and employer brand are seen as one as the same, and this really resonates in the jobs market. So if you have some like supply chain practices, like maybe you're not fair trade or something in a specific industry, or you're known to say have historically treated employees badly as well. I think that resonates a little bit more now. Yeah. And if you're a smaller employer, you probably can't take that risk right now, because there'll be someone willing to shout about it on social media. It's a lot more difficult to just brush things under the carpet these days. Like pesky people such as myself that work in the media and journalism are probably going to be a bit more on your back about it, because we follow these tweets and it's what we look out for, or these Facebook posts. So it's making sure that you're aware of every aspect of how your business works, employee treatment to like the day-to-day operations, how that forms part of your employer brand. I mentioned as well as part of that, like, people want a lot more from their employers than just a paycheck these days, and that means that HR is probably going to have to focus with the right people inside the company in evolving that employee brand as well. So McKinsey last year did some really good work on this. I think, yeah, it was McKinsey, and employees now expect their jobs to bring a significant sense of purpose to their lives. Yeah, and if we put that within the pandemic, I think a lot of people had time to reflect. I know lots of people were burnt out and there was lots of horrible things going on, but maybe the change in, you know, working structure, some people suddenly had time to work from home, so maybe they had the commute time to think, or whatever it was, or it was just the big change that was happening to everybody. They got time to reflect on their purpose. And as a result, I think a lot of people are reconsidering who they work for, or reevaluating what work means to them. So they're probably going to be looking for a type of work that aligns more with their purpose, or some of the things they care about in their life. So it means, I don't think it means that like HR should go out being like, oh, so we've got these employees that suddenly, or that care about X, therefore we should change our entire business to meet X. It's probably just being a bit more explicit about what you do stand for outside of making profit, and you'll probably get the right type of employees or attract the right type of person as a result. For employers that do get this right, again, there's loads of research on this. So if you get an employer brand that resonates in the market, and you get in the right type of talent, you get better engagement, you get better retention of staff, you get better peer-to-peer recommendations as well. So yeah, it's generally a good thing if you focus on the employer brands. I think a key thing to remember though is that it can't just be top down as well. Like, as we were saying before, Victoria, in comms, it's a two-way street thing. So if you're like, we're trying to create some values or a purpose outside of just existing as a company, include your staff. They do the day-to-day, they do the on-the-ground stuff. They might be able to see something that you can really like, kind of like cohere yourself around. There's a really good example of an employer that does this well. So Salesforce, who according to Glassdoor are the best employer in the UK right now, rated by employees, and they really do focus on their employer brands. They have really high pay, so that's really respected as well. So their employees or incoming talent is aware that they're going to be treated well. They're very aware of how the landscape is changing just in general life. So they have changed benefits for transgender employees recently. They're very, very vocal on LGBT plus issues. They actively seek out candidates from underrepresented backgrounds. They're aware of what skills they need, not just for this year or next year, but for 2030s as well. And what they do is create like programs for learning and stuff around that. And they're very aware when they market themselves on the in the employment marketplace, that what they're doing internally resonates externally as well. Someone that is very, very, very savvy with their employer brand. So I recommend looking at them if you are in HR and looking to kind of like up your game a bit, for someone who gets it.
Yeah, I think, like you said, all of these things are very fluid, because everything you're saying at the moment, I'm like, this definitely, it's like this could be viewed as employee experience as well.
Right?
Yeah.
100%. And it's, I almost wrote, when I was thinking about this, was like, actually everything that I'm saying for each of these sections, even though I don't think I've picked employee experience as one of them, it's all just underpinned by employee experience.
Yeah,
like definitely. So yeah.
And it's interesting with Glassdoor now, because I know if you go to apply to any job, I think now it's like an underwritten rule, you'll look on Glassdoor immediately first. So it's just completely transparent in that sense.
Yeah, and this is what I was saying, and this, you know, actually dovetails really, really nicely with the third thing that I was thinking actually is going to be a big thing for HR this year, which is talent acquisition. So actually much crossover with what I've just said for employer brand, because for me, and I think for many in HR, they see employer brand basically as a talent acquisition tool, even though it reflects, you know, the employee experience inside the company you're working at. But obviously there's been countless headlines in the past 6 months about how hard it is to acquire the talent that you need, or keep the talent that you need, or supply demand difficulties as well. But I think those are some of the top lines, and there's lots of interesting details that are happening underneath that I think HR, and I know many in HR already are, earnestly aware of and trying to figure out some fixes to as well. So with increasing numbers of people doing remote and hybrid work, I think the fact that like everything from applying for a job to even onboarding, or to interviewing, then onboarding, then taking the role, you might never actually meet an employer face to face for a lot of people now. And that's a massive change to the talent acquisition process. I think the characteristics of the talent acquisition process as well are changing. So it's not just a supply demand issue anymore, with there are literally more vacancies open than there are people to fill them, or people willing to fill them right now. But what employees are demanding, as we just spoke about before, Victoria. So they want purpose, they want an empathetic employer, they want an employer that puts well-being and social issues at the top of the agenda. So it's no longer just looking for a role and thinking, oh, that's a step up, or that pays slightly more than my last role, I'll apply because I've done X number of years and I need a change. So I think it is a massively changing landscape. Obviously, that top line is, as I said, is that hiring, because of the quote unquote the Great Resignation, and also the difficulty in getting talent, is top of the agenda. I think for CEOs at the moment, it is the number one concern, despite all these other things going on. So as a result, I think that's created a few interesting changes in the hiring landscape that I think many in HR probably are aware of already. I think part of that driving of change is, as we said, increasingly people want their employers to have a purpose. I don't want to group whole demographics together, but millennials is quite a useful tool sometimes. Millennials, overwhelmingly, now that they're a big cohort in the working age population, they want their employers to be making a positive difference in the world, and they're saying it's vital that the values of the business they work for match their own. So for me, that's pretty much nailed on. You've got to have some sense of, we exist for more than just giving shareholders lots of cash at the end of the year.
It seems like that. Obviously, COVID's been quite a catalyst for this whole change in the working environment. But do you think that it would have come about anyway, with this kind of change in the generations that are coming through, and COVID's just kind of been a supporter with the change that it's kind of had to put in place?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So the stat, or the study that I'm referencing there, was from American Express, and that was in 2019. So they were saying it was important just before the pandemic. But what I think the pandemic has done is either reinforced or sped up everything that was happening. So maybe those millennials, or just any employee, because I think it can happen for whatever age group you are, who might have thought, I really want my employer to be purposeful, or I really want to do some work that makes a really positive difference in the world. They might have thought, oh, there's not that much opportunity, or I don't really know. And maybe they've had time to reflect over the pandemic because everything changed, and they were like, actually, I really want to take that move or make the jump, or whatever it is. And maybe employers, because of this, are then having to react to that and go, actually, we do now exist for this, or we do have some purpose and values. So I think, yeah, you're right in saying, Scott, that it might not have happened, but it might not have happened to such an extent, or be so obvious now. And it seems that we're all in agreement that it's just so obvious that this is now the state of play for a lot of people.
Definitely. I'm interested for the next section, technology.
So yeah, technology as another thing that I think HR will have to focus on. There's so much to say here as well, because I guess technology has been a refrain from the past couple of years, where obviously tech became the way of working for a lot of people, because suddenly there was a work from home mandate if you could. So it changed everything. I think it's a bit wider than just how do I do my job from a remote setting though, or what kind of tools do we need for hybrid, even though that's going to be really important. I think we're going to talk more and more about automation and AI again, and how that might get rid of some of the traditional jobs and change the type of talent you might need to get into your business, i.e. do you employ the admin assistant that you've had for years, because actually that job could free up some time and space if it could just be done by a platform or something like that. And then what does that mean? Does that mean actually you can give everyone a 4-day week in your business, because some of the jobs can be automated? Or does it mean that there's going to be loads of people out of work because they no longer have the skills to do the jobs that exist now? So I think that's a really, really interesting question. I think there's also a really big question around the pandemic forced people to go digital, even if they didn't want to, or sped up loads of digital transformation. I think it was one of the big consultancies, one of the CEOs there was saying like, what would have taken like 10 years was basically done in a week when it comes to digital transformation. And that's not going to slow down. Like loads of like clever people in the tech space are just saying the tech's getting faster and faster. The world of work is changing quicker and quicker and quicker, and same for business. So what skills do businesses need to get in to adapt to this world, which is changing all the time and increasingly digital? And it can be really difficult to figure that out, right? Because like, again, some really smart people, they say like technology is a tool to get you where you want to go. It's not the end game in itself. So there's loads of noise around like blockchain and crypto and NFTs and the cloud and all these things at the moment. And it can be really exciting or tempting for a business to be like, oh, I'll start doing some stuff in that space, but it really doesn't help you or your business itself. And what I think HR needs to do there is actually become an advocate for both the business and the people and say, okay, so with all this change that's going on, which is just noise that we need to cut out, and then the technology that we do use, what's the impact on the people and the structures of work that we do have? So does the technology improve work? Does it improve things that workers really want, such as trust, engagement, communication, collaboration? So these are like the big HR questions that HR is going to have to get involved with when they're looking at what technology they're using or where they're going on their digital journey. I think, we talked about it as well earlier, Victoria, the employee experience. So how does the technology impact your employee experience? So 2020, lots of people were forced to go digital. It was like, sticking plasters in lots of places and that the tech that might have been used. But now we know remote, hybrid, cloud-based working is here for the long term. So it's about making more strategic decisions and maybe reflecting on some of the tech decisions that have been made, thinking through the people lens, through the business lens, and how does it all work together? And maybe holding leaders a bit to account as well. Like, this is what really surprised me when I was doing some research around this subject, that leaders overwhelmingly think that the technology they use is creating a really good business and employee experience, but workers don't think that's the case as well. So maybe it's a bit of that comms thing as well, and leading in with here and asking their workers what their frustrations are, what the tech that they've got on offer is like, how does it impact their ability to do their job or grow their career or learn new skills? Because that's going to be super, super important if you want to be a successful business and employer of choice. And I think there's a third piece here around what is going to increase digital uptake and digital skills uptake in your company as well. So again, it's probably around the messaging thing. So employees are more likely to want to digitally upskill or become early tech adopters in your company, or just adopt the tech that you want them to, if you sell it to them in terms that they care about. So it will make their work life more efficient. It will free up some of more of their time for better work. It will offer them long-term security. It will give them, better status, i.e. a better job role if they get ahead of this and they can get promoted. So you can't just say it's because the business needs or because of another change. That just won't cut it anymore. So I think HR's messaging around tech is going to have to get a lot better too. And then, like all the other standard things around that as well. Cybersecurity, data practice, all the things that have become a bit more difficult over the past 2 years.
Yeah.
Because it was rushed through, being a bit more, okay, let's neaten up the edges and make that a bit better, because it can be quite scary, especially if there's some legal areas that crosses into some of the fines that you can get there if you mess it up.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the final trend.
I guess this is a more existential one for HR, but I think HR, after a really, really hectic 2 years, where it went above and beyond time and time again and really showed itself to be such a crucial and central business function, is now probably going to have a bit of time to reflect on what is my role in the business going forward, what is my strategic position. So HR traditionally, I think many people listening to this podcast will know, has always been like a support function. It did admin tasks. It did a bit of like, your onboarding, your recruitment, your payroll, really crucial things. You have to get those things right. But over the years, it's taken on more and more and more, and it's become a lot more than that recently. So in the last 10 years, people have talked about splitting the function out. So one is a bit more like strategic and thinks of like the big picture, like what does the purpose of work mean for my employees, or like how can I provide really good data to the board so they can make really good people and business decisions. And then something which is a bit more historical, a bit more, we'll do the admin, we'll do the day-to-day operations, we'll take on board the complaints and do, put up the job ads. Again, stuff that's really, really important, but is a bit different to some of those like big ticket, strategically abstract issues. What I think we've seen during the pandemic is HR get a lot more respected for the former, because everything became about people at the start of the pandemic, and it was, guess what, HR that looks after people. So it's probably sped up that process where HR was being thought of as a bit more than just oh, you guys do the payroll and put up the job ads and take complaints if we've got one. So we did at HR Grapevine at the end of 2020, we did a long read called Why HR. We've basically looked at why was everyone turning to HR during the pandemic and not the other functions. And I think, as a lot of HR commentators at the time, Josh Burson amongst them, was saying, it's because the pandemic was a people crisis, not an economics crisis. Yeah. So you had to look after your people first, because that would actually ensure that your business kept on functioning as a result. So it was about making sure they had the tech to work from home, making sure they were safe, checking in on their well-being and their mental well-being a little bit more. And it was HR that was often, at the center of this. And as everything changed about work, I think a lot of people that outside of HR realized how important and how central everything that might have been a bit invisible and structural but was looked after by HR was. So it was like, okay, so what do the structure of works mean? Should I be more flexible? Should I be less flexible? How do I make sure that my working parents are okay? Are we forgetting this type of person? So I think actually that's put HR a bit more at the front and center. And if we couple that with what employees are like expecting from their employers these days, so they want more psychological support, they want more purpose, they want to work for an employer that's empathetic and looks after their well-being. Again, things that HR might be best placed to look after. You could, in my eyes, it makes sense that boards might be looking at HR and being like, actually, you're really central to the future of this business and helping shape where we go. And for HR, the savvier, more business-minded people in the function, or those at the top of the function, might be thinking, there's a really great opportunity to kind of like reframe what we do here, or even if we don't reframe what we do because we were saying this stuff anyway, put ourselves a bit more front and center and take heart from the fact that we were really relied on in the pandemic, and actually none of that stuff is going away. Like, there are going to be big crises going up, that CEO survey that I referenced earlier, lots of uncertainty, lots of change, maybe not as like acutely dangerous as the pandemic, but like big in terms of what it will do to businesses. So there's an opportunity for HR to be front and center, and to probably be a bit more leading within the business. We've got the CEO of the CIPD who told HR Grapevine a couple of years ago that he thinks HR can become the leading function in the business. Chanel have just hired, that's the right word, hired the head of HR at Unilever to be the next CEO, which I think reflects this change in the jobs market, where it's actually everything that HR does is now what we need to focus on as businesses to be successful. Yeah. So it's like all these little indications to me that actually HR has this opportunity to become the leading function in the business, or to be a bit louder and a bit more confident in its own voice in the business environment.
This is like the HR kind of going from that project mindset to more of a product focused mindset, almost, with it kind of delivering value and being an ongoing kind of, target that an ongoing product that you need to monitor and check in on, like, as with your people through this pulse surveys. And it seems like there are big strides for that to happen kind of across the board in all industries.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that product focus as well is going to be really, really crucial. And maybe as a result, like, I've just been very, very nice about HR, but I do believe, Scott, that there are some improvements to be made there. So showing how it delivers that value, getting better data. I read a really good description, I can't remember where it was, a couple of weeks ago, that basically said, you can't just get away anymore with saying, you know, in HR that, oh, we partnered with this TA function and we put some job ads up, but we don't really know how it did, or like we did this scheme, but we think it made people a bit happier at work. Like if you worked in marketing and went to your CEO and were like, oh, we did this ad campaign, but we don't really know if it resulted in an uptick in sales,
yeah,
you'd probably be fired or laughed out the room. So I think it's maybe speaking in a little bit more businessy terms and showing the value that it adds that is going to really show the rest of the business, or like those at the top, that HR does get what it's talking about and everything it does do has an impact that is positive.
I guess that also kind of ties back into the technology from what HR needs, from my kind of more of a scientific approach for, you know, being able to gather that data and then approach people and say, well, actually, we've done this on a small scale, we can now do it on a larger scale. And that's
yeah, definitely. Like being iterative and having the confidence to experiment a little bit more is definitely refrains that I've heard time and time again in conversation over the past couple of years too. So yeah.
So in a nutshell, how can we encompass all of these trends, and how can businesses try to get into the mindset of thinking about these trends and how they can overcome them as we go into the new year?
So I think one useful way of doing that is maybe to not focus on just one area, but maybe ask the question whenever you're looking at changing something, whether it's, you know, finding a new technology partner, changing your digital processes, creating a new campaign because you're creating a new program, whether it's learning or different structure of work, thinking, how does this affect my people in the business and what does it mean for their employee experience? Because I think what's been shown time and time again, especially over the past 2 years, is that whatever happens to your employees correlates with what happens to your business, and that's what HR ultimately is going to be judged on.
Amazing. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you for joining us today on Comms in a Nutshell. And thank you to all the listeners at home.